Greetings, travelers! I have published my first ever game from scratch. And no, it's not Elf Before Christmas. That would be nice though. But that'd be too soon as well. This is something else entirely. So last weekend I have entered my very first game jam, the IndieTales jam. And the theme for this one was One Room. So we had this whole weekend to create a game from scratch for this theme. And in this video I will go over my journey briefly, as I felt like so much happened in just a weekend. On the day of the reveal, I decided that since I don't get off work till later in the afternoon, I will plan everything down and get started on Saturday morning. So I came up with 3 ideas as you see here. The first one is a survival room, which is a classic hold the line against waves of enemies type of game. The second is a loopy room, which is a room that gets creepier and bigger throughout each loop. And the third is an escape room, which is a puzzle game that you have to solve riddles and clues to get out. And the winner is, you already guessed it, loopy room. Survival room sounded nice and all, but I am still a novice at coding, so that would have gone sideways. Doesn't mean loopy room is going to be easy with coding, as you see why later on. And the escape room sounded nice on paper, but going over it in detail seemed, how should I put this? Boring to me. Like, it's just boring. I can probably make it sound better, but with the time constraint, nah. But loopy room, it sounded different, and you could play with the creativity of nightmares extremely well. So henceforth, I had renamed Loopy Room into Nightmare Room. It's a fitting name if I do say so. As you can see, this is the premise of the whole plot. Basically of being a kid who has a nightmare, and in that nightmare it's his room that turned into a massive hallway with demon-like beings in the room, going all crazy and stuff. His objective is to wake up from this horror by reaching the door. But when he does, the room repeats, and it manifests into a much scarier and bigger version each time. However, the room does have a limit of loops, and if the kid is brave enough to go through the webs of fear, he will wake up again in relief. Now here is the heart of the project, as everything was planned out from here. So basically the cutscenes at the beginning, death, and you know, the good stuff. The character selection of who the player would be, and who will be their enemies. Some scenery ideas, some screens, and some UI stuff. And remember, this was all planned out on Friday night, which so far looks pretty nice. But let's see what happens on Saturday. As soon as I woke up, I ate some breakfast and went straight into art. However, when I started, I already had some tablet issues in the first few minutes, like damn. How do I test this? How do I recalculate this? I forgot how to do this. This is crazy. Damn. 2 minutes in and I'm already having issues with how to work the pen. I eventually solved this issue and started setting up the canvas for different art stuff, such as level design and character sheet. Once that was all set up, I started working on the bedroom level. But when I was working on the bedroom, I initially had no idea how I wanted it to be planned out, so I had to do some Google searches of references of what a bedroom is usually supposed to look like. Since my room setup is a bit awkward, so that wouldn't be wise to use that. This looks very nice. Oh, looks... Yeah, like the details, I mean. Like the wood. Looking at it more, it's kinda eh. Once I had everything figured out and ready to go, I decided, hey, let's make the child instead. In retrospect, making the child was probably the best decision I have ever made. Because, since having the child in the room already made, it will set up the whole proportions for how everything should be sized up. So that's pretty nice. Smart thinking past me. Oops. The first drawing didn't come out too well, but after the second drawing it came out looking pretty good. Also, the color palette I was using, I had no idea what it was, and I had no idea why I just went with it. But it worked at the end, so you know, that's all that counts. So now that the character is made, I went back and created the bedroom. Fast forward a bit and the bedroom looks like this. And then I just slapped the text in there and called it the title. Pretty classy, right? Like, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. Afterwards, I went to the player animations, but there was an issue. I forgot how people walk. I know. Such trying times. Anyways, let's fast forward a bit. I finished all the necessary animations for the player, which was to walk and smack with a pillow. I took a break to make lunch, and came back to stream some more of my progress in the game. The progress I started next was the cutscenes. In the end, it came out looking like this. After I started making the first level Nightmare Room. Remember, the Nightmare Room is the same room, but it's in a stretched out version. And I made it that way since having a room turn into a hellish long hallway at 3 AM is pretty terrifying as a little kid. And we are basically painting the imagery of what a little kid's late night fears could be. Spooky. Fast forward a bit, and this is what the first level Nightmare Room looks like. It's not too scary, right? Well, you're correct, because this is only the first level. It's meant to lure you into a state of being of, oh, this isn't so bad. So that when it gets really bad, you stubborn mindset refuse to accept that you're wrong, just having to suffer through the intensities of fear. But that's all theoretically, of course. Now, fast forwarding a few little things you'll see later on, I have made a cutscene to the transition level 1 gameplay. Let's have a little look-see. Fancy, right? Anyways, the last thing I did for Saturday was to put the gameplay together on Godot Engine and do some coding for it. What's the name of it? Okay, it was attack animation. Bingo. Okay. It wasn't too bad, but I didn't stream much on it since I had to look up some tutorials on how to do coding on certain things. And my novice brain for coding is pretty bad. However, I will show you the end result of Saturday. It was a successful day, for sure, but when everything is going too well, something is suspicious. And that suspicion was correct, as it revealed itself to me on Sunday of something really bad, and it was what caused me to do an all-nighter in hopes of solving it. I started my morning again with some breakfast and went back on the artwork. The objective for the artwork this time around was to create all 3 enemies and their variants for each level, the walking and hit animations, create the game over cutscene, ending cutscene, and create level 2 and 3. There's a lot to do. The first enemy I made was the humanoid bunny, and I had to search up some references real quick to get a general idea. Yeah, I'm gonna show something like this. This is freaking Amazing. That looks pretty nice. After gathering references for the humanoid bunny, I went straight to work. Like a fox almost. Yeah, we'll modify that later. The point of this part is just to get the join out. After modifying the outline and doing the anatomy, colors, and feel, it finally turned out looking like this. This humanoid bunny was now finished, and it was time to work on level 2 and level 3, which is where the creepiness finally kicks in. So let's have a little look-see at level 2 and 3. The progression is nice, right? But it's time for the creepy doll and the shadow being. It's basically the same process of looking up some idea references and then drawing it to fit the universe of this little kid. So here's what all three looks like at the end. Behold my beautiful creations. I just love how creepy and red it gets towards the last level. My personal favorite is the creepy doll I did. I also did the animations for these guys, so let's have a little look-see. Okay, so the first animation we have here is the humanoid bunny. And it will show the walk animation as like a human with its arms fixated towards the front. And the combat animation of it doing a claw hug. And I repeat the animations for the other side and for the other two levels, just to stay consistent. Next we have the animation for the creepy doll, which is the walking animation and a slapping animation for combat. And also repeats on the other side and for the other levels. Lastly, we see here the animation for the shadow being, which is a simple up and down movement, since this character hurts you upon contact. All of the enemies and animations took me a good 4 hours to do, which took so long, but it was worth it at the end, right? Right? Remember, this took 4 hours to make, so just keep that in mind for later on. Afterwards, I took a break to eat and went back to work on level 2 and level 3, which was a ton of fun to do. After the levels were done, I made the last two cutscenes. The first is the game over screen, which is the kid getting possessed. Basically, his regular room became the nightmare room and got taken over by the demons there. You will get an opportunity to retry this again when it says try again in the screen. If the player clicks on it, then you will have to restart back to level 1. Overall, this is basically the bad ending. But if the player makes it to the end, then they will get this cutscene instead. Basically being free from the nightmare, cries briefly because of how scared he was, and gets off the bed to get away from the nightmare. This is considered a good ending as it would take you back to the start screen. Now that all the art is done, I went to Godot to produce a game, and thus began the true terror that waited before me. It was 7 PM and I had to 8 AM to make this work. I didn't feel like streaming at the time since I wanted to concentrate more and look up a bunch of tutorials. On the first hour or so, I did all the easy stuff out of the way to feel less overwhelmed. So basically getting the cutscenes, levels, and transitions out of the way. Once that was taken care of, it was time for the Hearts UI system, the enemies, and for the death to lead to the game over screen. I didn't have any clips from the process, so I will show you what I did at the end. The Hearts you already know, I had to look up tutorials for that, because damn, that's difficult. Huge thanks to Heartbeats and his Godot Action RPG tutorial series, since that's what guided me from going crazy from this coding. I was struggling a bit, but with these tutorials I was able to successfully implement the hearts. Next it was time for the enemies. I started with the Shadow Being, since it has no animation besides going up and down constantly, so that was easy. But it was tedious since I had to throw in so many area nodes and collision shapes to each level of the Shadow Being. And one issue I had for the longest was the creature not wandering properly, and it annoyed the living hell out of me. Like, it wouldn't stay still properly, it would just wander aimlessly forever. It took me an hour to solve it all, to just realize that the collision's mask wasn't set to player. So that was an hour wasted, but it was okay since I was like, one is down, 2 more enemy types to go, and I can set the level designs, player death transitions, and it would be good to go at 1 AM. Or so I thought. I went to the animation tree and started producing the animation for this bad boy. But when I went to the coding bit, the sudden realization of me still being a novice, of not knowing how to even design a way to signal the walking animation from left or right when it decides to move, nor the idea of how to signal the melee hit. I spent an hour, and with no luck on the walking, I moved on to the hit animations instead, and I came up with an idea for it. The idea was to have the collision shape detect the player's location in front of it, and give the signal to the animation tree to play and have the animation collision shape that's in the tree to hit the area in front of the bunny. It was a genius plan in my head, but when I tried it out, it didn't even work. It didn't even want to send the signal to the animation player at all. It's crazy. I spent another hour trying to solve that, but I couldn't think of anything, and it was now 12 AM already. I decided that it was best to come back to this after doing the death transition, since I refused to give up on these two enemies, since I spent 4 hours on these creatures, and not being able to use them, it would just make the gameplay so boring. I want to test the gameplay on what happens to the player after death, to work from there. The player just poofs, and the camera reverts to the start. I was like, okay, that's fine, I can fix this. But when I tried messing with the coding a bit, it was still the same. I continued to experiment with the coding and such, but after many trials and errors, I just couldn't get it to work. It was insane. I spent all night just trying to get it to work. So many hours wasted just trying this coding. And if my knowledge being so limited, I couldn't get anywhere. It was now 6 AM and I was so upset and maybe sleepy. I made the tough decision to just disregard my 2 precious mobs and disregard the game over cutscene and just focus on the shadow beings and improvise from there. Because I have to produce something. And so I did. Since I only have 3 shadow enemies to work with, I combined them all together instead of having them separated, to at least feel like the gameplay is kind of interesting. I playtested it a bit, and it actually came out pretty good actually. That's a shocker. Very easy however, but it's manageable for the game jam at least. However, I overlooked something and it was almost 7 AM. The sounds. I decided the music was a higher priority than the actual hit sounds, so I used the Beatbox website to create something. It took many trials and errors, but here what it sounded like at the end. The music was manageable, right? It wasn't too bad, it wasn't too great, but it was still okay to work with. And when I finished, it was 7:20 a.m. I had to search up how to properly upload the game and set it up in the website. In the end, I was able to successfully submit my first ever game from scratch to my first ever game jam, which that is a huge accomplishment, a stepping stone for future games. And in this game jam, I wrote a disclaimer in the description to inform that the game is not 100% completed, of course, and the issues I had probably could have been easily solved if I had more knowledge in coding. With that being said, we only get better from here. Also, thanks to this wonderful community, I was now able to learn a ton of new ways to improve on the gameplay and sound mechanics, which is very key to my next game jam and my current ambitious project, Elf Before Christmas. But I will link Nightmare Room in the description if you are interested in playing. I will also have a devlog out in the coming week or two for Elf Before Christmas as well. Be prepared for that because there's some interesting information for that devlog coming up. Anyways, I shall bid you all farewell.